Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the LitRPG Podcast. I am Ramon Mejia. I'm here to bring you the latest LitRPG news, reviews, and of course author interviews. And this week on the podcast, it's episode number 99. That's right, folks. We are almost to episode 100. This week, there was a staggering number of LitRPG titles that came out. And these are just the ones that are actually LitRPG, not just the ones who are using tags to get eyeballs. There were over, between the end of last week's podcast and this one, over 20 novels came out. I have 11 reviews for you this week, 10 others in out now that I haven't read, and one case of just plagiarism in the LitRPG news. So much stuff this week. I'll also be announcing the second set of winners for the LitRPG episode 100 podcast giveaway thing that I'm doing in LitRPG news as well. So we'll begin with the titles that are up for review this week, and that includes New Eden Royale, I should say, then also The Park, and then Avatar's Rising, Silos 1, then Duel Reality 2071, that'll be Bounty Harlot, A World of Brutalia, then it'll be Playing for Keeps, Alpha World Book number 4, and then it'll be Unbound, Deathlord, Obliteration, which is the second book in that particular series. That'll be Crafter's Passion, then Chrysalis, the Crucible of Immortality, book number 2, then Soulstone, Oblivion, World of Ruul, book number 3, and then last but not least, it'll be Kingdom level 4. So there we go. And of course, though, we begin the show though with LitRPG news. And in LitRPG news, we're going to begin with the story of a plagiarist. This is a rather simple story. I was reviewing this novel for the podcast this week. It's The God of Leveling by Grayson Miller on Amazon. It was 96 pages. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, this is a bad story. I mean, like, technically, the writing was bad. Like, the story itself is actually kind of neat. It's kind of like a cheat OP kind of story. But the actual writing was just horrible. And as I'm reading, I'm thinking, this, like, there's just so many. I was like, is this a translation? And then as I read further into it, I actually saw a note in parentheses that's like TL and some commentary. I'm like, the light bulb just went on my head. Like, this is a fan translation. And I recognize those little note things because a couple of years ago, when there weren't 20 LitRPG titles reviewed a week, there was some more like, 1 or 2 a month. And so to fill that void of LitRPG, addiction, I would often go online, look for just fan translation stories of stuff that wasn't licensed in the US from other countries. And they're just free go to novel updates or Royal Road or whatever. And they're fun stories. Sometimes they're just regular just like free stuff, but sometimes there were also fan translations of popular works from other countries, like Korea, China, Japan. And again, once for most fan translation groups, once they were officially licensed in the US, or there's any news about like, them actually coming to the US legitimately, all those fan translations would always delete those works. But until they were just there. And they weren't like making money off of it generally. It was used for fun. But I recognize that tag of like translations, translator notes explaining like, this is a joke in this language, this is what it means, or this is a cultural concept that I have to explain out, or something else like that. And just doing a quick Google search of like the first few sentences in this novel basically showed that it was a copy and paste translation from someone else, like a fan translator, TISRP Translations, translated it, and someone else just copy and pasted it all and published it on Amazon to try to make money off of it. I actually contacted that particular fan translator, and they were like, yeah, no, this is completely unauthorized. As far as I know, the original writer of the story, this is a Chinese novel, I believe. The original author is Yosuke Tokino. I could be mistaken for being Chinese. But I have a link in the show notes for the actual Chinese version of it on Amazon, because this is a fully published thing in China, including on like an Amazon version in Chinese language. And there is no English translator. And I sourced this on 2 different sites, a Novel Update and also with this particular fan translator. And so I'll also link the show notes for like the fan translation if you want to compare or read it on your own. But this is just a blatant money grab from somebody who's like, oh, this is popular. I'm going to just copy and paste it, put it in an ebook, up on Amazon, and we'll see how much money I can make. Thankfully, I notified Amazon. The book has already been deleted from Amazon, but the same author has another work which is very similar. It's called The Life of an Overpowered Main Character. That's still up there, so I don't know if Amazon has banned the account or not yet. But thankfully, this one, The God of Leveling, is gone. But it is just another one of those cases, and there have been more than I've liked this year of this kind of plagiarism stuff. People stealing other people's work, especially in the LitRPG community, trying to make a quick buck. And so thankfully we got this one relatively quickly, and it is now gone. So, but that's the story. Okay, on to our next story. Drinking with Charles. I did actually a fun Drinking with Charles episode. Charles Dean is the author of War of Eternius. Bear's Attack is also the laser, very line of sight. The Bathrobe Knight. And sorry, I forgot to turn on the sound when I put up the clip of the Bathrobe Knight and Merchant of Tikba. Fun guy, fun to have. We played Cards Against Humanity with him. His wife was there, David Wilmarth, and the 4 of us just kind of had a fun time and said many, many inappropriate things. So it was very entertaining. So go check that out. Good stuff, good jokes, and again, lots of drinking. So fun stuff. Of course, also check out Charles's general YouTube page. He's trying to do a twice a week thing where he's doing fun things with people he likes, authors in the community. So there you go. Also in LitRPG news, S.L. Rowland, author of Pangea Online, started his own Patreon page. The rewards range from a thank you to early chapter releases, to signed print copies of the novel, and even input on character development. So go check out his Patreon page if you're a fan of his work. I have a link in the show notes for his Patreon page. Also, Blaze Corbin. He is going to be releasing a new book in his Delvers LLC universe. It is not a Delvers LLC main story, though. It's like a side story for a new series in the same universe under the title Nora. So it's going to be for the character Nora. But to help promote the work and promote the universe in general, he's actually putting Delvers LLC Book 1 on sale. It's usually $5.98, which is pretty appropriate for a 600-page novel. It is on sale for $2.99 right now. So go pick that up if you haven't had a chance to read it. It's also on Kindle Unlimited, so you can also catch it there. It'll be on sale until March the 4th. We'll have a link in the show notes for you to get there. Okay, now LitRPG giveaway podcast stuff. There you go. It's again, we are getting really close to episode 100 of the show, and just to celebrate that entire momentous milestone for us, that's almost 2 years of straight podcasting. I decided to basically do this huge contest or contest to try to get, one part just promotion for the podcast. It's just fun, but also just to give back to the community and say, hey, thanks guys for supporting the podcast so much. Here's some free merch. We'll enter you in a raffle kind of thing. We'll use a random number generator to pick out winners on the show. And so these are the winners for this week's stuff. We have Keanu Brown, Georgia Eggers, Charles Hansen. So those 3 folks are this week's winners. I've already sent messages to them on either email or Facebook or wherever they chose to contact us or to sign up. So make sure you check your messages, folks. Sometimes Facebook will have Facebook message requests that you don't notice right away. So check that out, of course. And of course, check your email. Make sure our congratulatory message isn't in your spam box. But they get some really cool prizes, actually. They're actually going to get a choice between physical prizes if they're in the US, like a signed copy of Ventures in Terra or Project Alpha, or Alpha Company t-shirt, which is always really fun. Dennis Shinofum was nice enough to to donate some of his t-shirts. Or also, Alon Kong was also nice enough to donate some stuff. He actually donated some of his merch from his site, LitRPG stuff like sweaters and t-shirts. Or the winners could also choose like digital stuff like ebooks from people like Apollo Sloan, Danny Chinofin, Dave Wilmarth, or myself, Ramon Mejia, for all of our series work. So like larger prizes, even the digital versions, you get the entire like series of stuff. So good stuff there as well. So again, all those messages are out. Now we still have one more gigantic prize giveaway for next week on episode 100. And remember, you can still sign up. You can still enter chances to win. There are plenty of ways to do so, including signing up for the LitRPG Podcast newsletter. We will link in the show notes for that. That's just where I send you the show notes for the podcast every week, including like links to the video and audio versions of it. And so in case you don't get a chance to listen to us or watch us, you still get a nice listing of like reviews and new things that have come out and things that are upcoming. Some people prefer it that way, but that's all it really is. Also, you get another chance to enter the contest by liking our Facebook, Twitter, YouTube pages. That's also another entry into the contest each. Or, like I said, another way to enter is to send us an email at litrpgpodcast@gmail.com, or post on our Facebook or Twitter page, basically saying what you like about the podcast, whether it's a particular story or particular event or an episode or an author interview, whatever it is. Letting us know like the things you enjoy about the show. And I plan to personally actually read those on episode 100 as part of like, oh, these are people's favorite moments kind of stuff. So there's that. Now again, next week prizes are actually going to be the bigger ones, or I should say the more comprehensive. We're going to have 2 runners up. They get a chance. They're going to get both a signed novel from me, one of the either Project Alpha books or the Adventures of Terror novels, and they'll also get a t-shirt from Daniel Schinohofen's his Alpha Company t-shirt. So those are nice, good physical prizes for the runners up. But also, we'll have one grand prize winner. They're going to get the whole shebang. They're going to get an entire set of R.M. Mejia novels. Every physical novel I have signed and personalized for you. They're going to get the Daniel Schinohofen Alpha Company t-shirt, which is limited edition because this is the first run, which has a slight error, which makes it more valuable. It makes it collectors. You're also going to get a limited edition LitRPG Podcast t-shirt. See? And a R.A. Mejia Adventures on Terror t-shirt. There's literally like a couple of these printed. I did a small run when I was going to go to Dragon Con, and these are just some of those. And they're, of course, going to be getting a sweater from Alon Kong, and a $100 Amazon gift card. Get it? $100, episode 100. And again, the big grand prize winner is going to have to be in the United States because shipping costs internationally are just way too expensive. But it's still pretty good big grand prize if you ask me. But again, I'll be giving away that one at episode number 100. So there you go. That's your LitRPG new folks. And again, thanks again for supporting the podcast. And please enter the contest giveaway. It's free stuff. Okay, on to Out Now. These are the stories that are out now. Again, I haven't had a chance to read them. Remember, 11 reviews this week, and there's still another 10 that came out between last week and now. And this includes Dungeon Disposed by William D. Rand. Warriors Academy Episode 2 is also out as well, as is Threadbare Volume 3. Now, this one was actually a little harder to find on the Amazon search. Every time I looked for like new LitRPG on Amazon for the Kindle stuff, this one never showed for some reason. Hopefully the author has gotten this written out. I mentioned it to him. He said he did. But this is a real fun series as far as I'm concerned. It's really nice, actually. Kind of cute and fun and interesting and very different. So really enjoyable. But it is out as well, as is Tales of the Gemsmith. Also out now is The Lionheart, a LitRPG novel, no Respawn Book 1. Dragon Seed is also out as well, as is Borrow King, which is supposed to be the first book in a series from C.M. Carty. Also out is Dead Man Gaming, as is Fizzle Sprocket. This is actually the second book in the Everybody Loves Large Chess volume series. It's the second volume in that series. So I enjoyed it, but it's out as well. As is Dagger Lords by L.A. Burns. Now, just a quick heads up about this particular novel. It was originally published under the title The Kingdom Stone by the author. And I gave that particular novel a 4 out of 10. It just, for various reasons, you can look at the website if you want a full reason why. But the author is totally honest about it. He says in the novel description, this was originally published as the Kingdom Stone. So he's upfront that this is a republish. He says that he changed the story to make it a better lit RPG novel. So I'm like, I'll give it a chance. I don't know that if you want to. Also, I did notice that the cover here feels a little pre-made. I don't remember anything in the novel relating to this particular cover art. But again, it has been a while since I've read the story. So just heads up that sometimes these occur. Some authors get negative reviews and then they take their story down and sometimes it's just repackaging with the new cover and they put it up. Other times it's literally like they rewrite the entire story or they redo the things that they got criticism on. So hopefully this is the latter and it's a good story again. But again, I'll be reading it next week, hopefully. Okay, new LitRPG audiobooks that are out. We have Gods of the Second World. This is the weirdest new book 3. This ends that particular series. It's out as an audiobook. Also, The Gore God's Mantle is out as an audiobook, written by J.A. Hunter and Aaron Crash, narrated by Arment Taylor. So good stuff there. Also, Tao Wong's Dungeon Soul. This is the 3rd book in the Adventures on Brad series, out as an audiobook. Also, Harmon Cooper's The Last Word of Ungaia. I'm probably saying that wrong. Actually, I know I'm saying it wrong. Jeff Hayes corrected me, but I don't remember what the actual pronunciation is. But Jeff Hayes is the narrator on that. So there we go, as is Annie Ellicott. So it's a sound booth theater production. So it's the 3rd book in the Last Word of Ungaia series by Harmon Cooper. Also out as a audiobook is The Crisis at Clearwater, Unexplored Cycle Book 2. This is a sexy book. So be aware that this is a LitRPG title, but it is also an adult sex romance story as well. So, and of course, if you don't remember any of these stuff, we have the links in the show notes for the ebook reviews that we gave each one of them. So you can always check those out. But of course, also listen to samples because narrators' voices matter. Okay, in upcoming LitRPG, this is just where I read off a bunch of titles for stuff I know is coming out. We have some new additions to this particular list, but you can, of course, skip ahead if you so choose. Out on March 6th is the Restart, Dark Paladin Book 3. Is on March the 7th, there's The Outpost. Then on the 8th of March, this one's new to this list, Dungeon Child. This is the 3rd book in the Glendaria Awakens trilogy series. March the 12th, The Crown and Key. This is the 3rd book the 8th book in the Feral series. On March 15th, we'll have the Permadeath Online Book 2. Then on March 15th, this one's new, The Ritualist. Book 1 in the Completist Chronicle series, written by Dakota Crown. So you know my Dakota Crown from the Divine Dungeon series, those books right back there is where he was next to Sedvi. He's also a friend of the podcast, I'll admit it. If you read the last Divine Dungeon novel, he actually included a sample of this work in at the end of that, and it seemed really fun and interesting. So I'm looking forward to actually reading that one a lot. Also, Don Chapman's 4th book in the Batara Online series, Achilles' Reign, will be out on March the 16th. March 19th, you'll get Ghost in the Game, which is the 3rd book in the Dream State Saga series. On May the 10th, now we're going to May already. April, apparently nobody's doing anything in April. But on May the 10th, Mightier Still. This is another novel in the Lovriar side quest series. This is I reviewed another novel from this author in the same universe. This seems to be a different main character and kind of a side series in the same kind of world though. So we'll see how that one turns out. Blind Gambit will be out on May the 10th. May the 17th, they're getting World of Karik. Book 2 in that series, I guess. On May the 24th, you're going to get Alter Game Book 3, God Mode. So there you go. May the 27th, it'll be Kingdom Level 5. We're reviewing Kingdom Level 4 this week. On May the 28th, you're going to get the 2nd book in the Dragon Rider series called Trial by Fire. Then on May the 30th, you're going to get a new series, and this is actually a new Russian translation that translated by the good folks at Magic Dome Books, the same folks who did the translation work for Way of the Shaman and a bunch of other stuff. This is going to be called The Dead Rogue, an NPC Pass book number 1. So I'm kind of curious to see where this goes. You can actually check out, I believe, the first chapter at their website on Magic Dump Books if you are curious about that. Okay, that's it for new stuff, for upcoming stuff. Onto the actual reviews and new releases and reviews. And in new releases and reviews, we're going to begin with the New Eden Royale, an Apocalyptic's LitRPG series written by Deck Davis. Now, you might actually remember Deck Davis from, he actually does a lot of book ones. Like, he has like 3 or 4 book ones in LitRPG series that don't have book 2s, including one of my more favorite ones, the Arcane Survivalist. So this is another one from him. I'll read you the author's description. Harry Wollenstein is a regular guy. He loves his ranch, his dogs, and beer. He's just a normal dude. Except that he makes his living fighting in brutal virtual wars. For him, money is short, and like everyone else, he needs to make enough to get by. When a huge battle is announced in the capital city, New Eden, Harry will do anything to qualify. The only problem is that battles are controlled by overseers, and Harry has some history with an overseer in New Eden. Things aren't going to be easy for him. When fighters enter the battlefield, the world city gives way to a fantasy land filled with whatever horrific creatures that the overseer's cruel minds conjure up. The command with swords, runes, skills, and spells in digital death battles. The fight may be virtual, but the danger is real. For Harry, the stakes couldn't be any higher. And this one is 431 pages, $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay. Again, this is kind of one of the weaker entries from Deck Davis and the things that he's written. I much prefer the Arcane Survivalist. Go check that out if you want something interesting and a little bit different to read. My biggest issue with this story is that I never cared about anybody. I never cared about the main character. The game mechanic stuff in the story is competitive online, like a battle royale kind of system. So if you play games like Overwatch or some other like player versus player like mobile games online, then that's the kind of game system that is in this novel. And for me, it's not my favorite kind of game to play. Like, it's never really appealed to me as a player, as like a gamer. So it wasn't as appealing to me as a reader either. But if you're into those kind of stories, if you're into those kind of games, I should say, this might be more appealing to you than it was for me. But for me, a bigger issue is that a lot of the backstory doesn't make sense. For example, like it was mentioned in the novel description, there is an evil overseer that has it out for the main character, but eventually when it's revealed why, it's like, that doesn't make sense. And why would he be so angry that he'd ruin your entire family's life? Like, it's legitimately annoying. Like, oh, that's the reason that he does those things. That was like my reaction when I finally read it at the end. And also the motivations for even the main character playing this game don't really make a ton of sense. Like, his motivation is basically, I don't want to have to move into the big city. That's legitimately what it is. And so he has to play this game to try to get enough money to like fix the tech at his house so that the sun doesn't murder everybody. Like, there's a whole world set up where like, oh, the ozone layer is depleted, so people live in like these kind of like domed areas. But that's a secondary aspect of the novel. And on to that backstory for the larger world was sometimes more interesting to me than some of the gameplay stuff. And it's not one or the other. It's like, hopefully in a good novel you have both. It's just that sometimes in this case, that just happens to be the case. Like, there's really no substantial reason why the main character actually plays this game. So the stakes aren't really as big as he makes it out to be in the novel, unfortunately. Like I said, the gameplay mechanics lead very much towards competitive player versus player play. Rather light on some of the RPG parts. Again, not bad game mechanics in any way, shape, or form. It's just that the gameplay wasn't something I'm really into. And for those reasons and the fact that the other stuff I mentioned, like, I just couldn't get into the story. Like, it's not badly written now. It's just that I never cared with the main character or anybody really did well. And so if I can't empathize with the character, if I don't understand his motivations as being actually important, it's like, dude, just stay home, get a different job, and you'll be fine. You don't have to play this game at all. It just never really clicked for me. And like I said, it's just a slightly weaker entry from the author in LitRPG for me. So for me, it gets a score of 5 out of 10. Not bad, so it just never really caught my interest. So it's got little boring. So that's a 5 out of 10 for New Eden Royale, an apocalyptic lit RPG series. Okay, on to our next one, The Park, a lit RPG novel, The Park Online, Book 1. Honestly, I'll have to say that's a nice cover. I wish the novel was as interesting. This one is 246 pages, $4.99, a little expensive. Available on Kindle Unlimited. So for that price point, honestly, it's about twice as much as I normally spend. I'll read you the author's description. I already messed up. First rule of Haven: get out alive. Garrett Jones wants to save his sister, making her an immortal within the world's online hub, The Park. The thought of giving her unlimited time with her kids within the world she loves becomes Garrett's one dream. But the 5 million credit price for this rare status is more than he or his family can afford. Until a long-abandoned game, Haven mysteriously comes back online, offering 5 million credits for the guild or company who can complete the dangerous questline under an undisclosed deadline. Garrett finds himself in a world that reaches beyond the limits of a game and into his personal life, putting himself in danger and the fragile life of his sister. Will he and his friends finish Haven before forces within the park find his sister's body, or death takes her forever? So there we go. That's actually a rather accurate premise. Good description of the novel. This, however, is not, it is lit RPG. The game stuff has RPG mechanics when they get to like the actual Park Haven. But it's really a techno thriller cyberpunk novel. And portions of it just happen to have RPG mechanics and RPG game systems. In the story, Earth has expanded to the stars, and there's a giant hub system called the Park that connects other virtual worlds in a kind of like VR theme park system. The main character, Garrett, works for the park as a kind of security agent, tracking down virtual hackers and troublemakers in-game, literally in virtual reality, like running towards them and burning them with like a flamethrower, and deleting their access to the game. That doesn't make sense on any level in modern virtual reality or computer concepts. That concept in itself is very like 80s, where like people thought, oh, you had to be in the system to capture the bad guy. But that's a side point. His sister eventually gets run over, and he gets a chance to win some money to have her brain uploaded to the system. And again, this is technically a lit RPG novel. It is. After the 17% mark, a large part of the story is set in an obviously stated RPG game world, and none of the game mechanics are hidden from either the reader or the character. So, lit RPG. There you go. But honestly, even though there are some really detailed statements here, like there's really detailed character sheets, item descriptions, abilities, spell descriptors. None of that matters, because the RPG stuff, even the game for that matter, really don't seem to matter to the story. And you know how you can usually tell that's the case? When large parts of the game progress are just skipped. Or if you skip those game part scenes, the story doesn't change, like, at all. And those are both cases in this particular novel. For example, the main character in the story accidentally chooses the Blue Mage class. And he has a really detailed character sheet and a list of skills and spells and the whole shebang. And you think, oh, this is going to be good. I love Blue Mages. They get to, absorb skills from other characters, whatever. But when it actually comes to RPG content, like text about him playing the game and fighting monsters and quests and leveling up and deciding what to do when you reach levels, a lot of that is skipped. It's rather light in the actual story. Like in the space of like a few pages, the main character goes from level 1 to level 4 to level 15. And there were just like a ton of level skips. It's like, oh, and I survived till I was level 15. Literally, that's an actual sentence from the novel. And like a paragraph before, he was level 4. And that's the description of that progress. It's like, oh, I survived till I was level 15. I'm like, that's it? That's your RPG progress? And even when the main character, and again, this is a tiny bit spoilery, when he dies, in the context, you're supposed to have like one life, and once you die, you get kicked out. But he magically has an item that he needs to not only re-enter the game, but when he re-enters, he's magically... his level raises to 30. And when he died, he was 15. So it's like 15, die, comes back. Oh, I'm 30 now. How? Cause. And it's just the kind of stuff. I was like, oh, this novel doesn't care about RPG stuff. This is a cyberpunk. This is a techno thriller, and that's fine. And really, it is. If that's what you want to read, this is cool for you. This is not a bad story in that respect. But it bothers me because I'm like, I came because this thing says I'm a LitRPG novel, and the LitRPG stuff, the RPG stuff, just I'm like, oh, like they started out like with like a really good system, and like they do detailed stuff, but like ultimately it doesn't matter to the story. And there's like so much level skipping. I'm like, oh, and even like when there is stuff about like combat and fights, because there's stuff there. Like the numbers don't always make sense. Like at level 1, the main character is like soloing monsters who are 3 to 4 times his level. And he doesn't die. And that's a big point in the story. Like if you die, you get kicked out of this contest, which means that he can't win. And so, while you're reading, the main character can't really die until like he gets the magic item that's going to bring him back and give him that second chance. And the only real reason that levels even exist in this story is because there are some artificially defined quests that require a certain level. And so like that's kind of the point of this RPG stuff is like, oh, we got to get him to level 60 so he can finally beat the last boss battle or whatever and win the prize. And that's kind of the focus of like what the game stuff is like, oh, artificially just bumping him up so the story can basically progress. It's not about the fights, it's not about the RPG part, it's about getting to him where he needs to be so that the real story can go on. You know what I mean? And like I said, it's just, it was kind of annoying. There is, again, a techno thriller cyberpunk story here about a rival company wanting to take over the park. And the park is basically the Oasis from Ready Player One. The bad corporation is like IOI. That kind of stuff. There's some stuff about the owners being uploaded into the game and the MC sister just knowing too much, and that's why she was taken out. But like I said, you can literally skip all the game stuff and you don't lose anything. Like the story itself it's not horrible. Like the techno thriller stuff it's not the worst that I've read. It's not, but it's not the best, but it isn't boring. It's just like the game stuff, the RPG stuff, and the story, like it doesn't matter. And that's kind of sad to me. And overall, it just wasn't entertaining because when the RPG game stuff doesn't matter, the story, I kind of stopped caring because that's what I came to this story for. It wasn't, I'm always happy when there's like good real world storylines, but if like the game stuff doesn't matter, if the RPG stuff doesn't matter, like, I'm just not interested. I'm sorry. So there you go. And also there's like a huge cliffhanger ending. And so you don't actually get any kind of resolution to this entire story. So I'm like, so for me, 5 out of 10, The Park, a LitRPG novel, The Park Online, book 1 with a score of 5 out of 10. There you go. Okay. On to our third review, which is going to be Avatar Rising, Silos Book 1, written by David R. Bernstein and Harper North. This one is 278 pages. It is $2.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. Emerging possibilities, fading hope. Asa wakes up in a dark cement silo with no memory of who she is or how she got there. It doesn't take long to realize that the world she's in is not what it seems when her body is taken over by an unknown presence and she's forced to fight. She meets 2 strangers that reveal an unbelievable truth. Essa is a sentient avatar in a game world. Essa knows she has to level up to find answers, but in an expansive dystopian world of kill or be killed is what she seeks worth the risk. Immerse yourself in this exciting new young adult gamelit sci-fi series that asks the question, what if the avatars became self-aware? So there you go. The novel has, in the novel description, tagged itself as gamelit specifically. Earlier, like a couple months ago, it was actually titled as a LitRPG story. The reason I'm actually reviewing this is at all because the author contacted me multiple times saying, hey, can you add this to your LitRPG podcast upcoming list? And also, can you review it? Because I think you enjoy it. It's LitRPG. Like, are you sure? Because the novel description doesn't say it. He's like, yeah, sure. And so I gave it a full review. I also got an advanced copy, full disclosure, from the author. And basically, this isn't LitRPG. Even though it was described to me as such, it is not. It's not even gamelit. And that's kind of annoying to me because I'm like, I read the entire thing. There's also some other issues. I when I was researching the story and like pulling together information for the review, I noticed that the novel came out on a specific date, but like it already had reviews before it was actually published. And like, and it had 5 reviews, and they were dated like 10 days before the novel actually came out. So they seemed a little shady to me. And again, the author, when I wrote the review on Amazon, the author contacted me and said, I'd appreciate if you would clarify that his publishing company didn't do anything illegal. They didn't pay for any reviews. They were all from people who gave honest reviews in exchange for arcs, and that's fine. My issue is the fact that you are basically trying to work the system, and it seems like review padding. Like when you have reviews there on your novel before it's out, like 2 weeks before it's even out, that seems a little shady to me. And again, it's not illegal. It's not against the terms of service on Amazon, but it does feel like review padding to me, at least. Now, the author asked me to put this novel on the podcast and review it as a LitRPG story. It's not LitRPG in any way, shape, or form. There are no RPG mechanics in the story, and there's not really even a game, which is why I say it's not even game-lit. It's more of like, it feels more like, remember like Tron or the show Reboot, where you have avatars who are self-aware and they're trying to accomplish something, whether it's like saving the system or defeating Megabyte or whatever. That's kind of what this feels like, and it feels more like that kind of VR simulation where you have a couple self-aware avatars and they're trying to escape or trying to not to be deleted by the game overseers. And that's all this really is. The story, again, starts out with somebody who doesn't know where she is, being forced to fight. She has no memory. And then it becomes about her and some other character trying to escape their program. And they're told that if they reach level 10, then they can reach salvation. Only leveling, in this instance, this entire novel consists of the main character or somebody else finding an orb that makes them feel stronger. That's it. That's the only reference to leveling. That's the only thing that even comes close to any kind of game mechanic. That is it. So I'm like, that is definitely not LitRPG. And I think for most people, it's not even game-like, because there's not really a game here. It's more like a simulation in a system. So I'm like, okay, it is what it is. It's just, for me, either the author or the publisher doesn't really understand what LitRPG is, and I think that is the case, or it's something else. It's still, the novel's not LitRPG. Even the techno self-aware aspect of the story doesn't really make sense. The combat isn't great. The characters are kind of flat, and that's kind of a consequence. Like, oh, you're just becoming self-aware. You don't have a backstory. You shouldn't really even have emotions because you're a program, and unless it's programmed into you, like, why do you have them? And again, the rest of the story just wasn't that fascinating because, again, no RPG stuff, no interest for Ramon in a way. Even as a techno thriller cyberpunk thing, it would get like a 5 out of 10. Not that interesting to me, but as a LitRPG, it just isn't. When I was told that it would be, and the author was very specific. So for me, it gets a score of 4 out of 10 because it's not actually a LitRPG. So there you go. Okay, on to our next review. Duel Reality 2071 Dystopian LitRPG Cyberpunk Horror Novel. Long title. It's 256 pages, $2.99. It is not available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description because it gives you an insight on what the story is like. It's 2071. Duel Reality is a deadly game where contestants fight for fame and fortune, but the game's popularity reaches new heights when the latest upgrade, known as the Terminal, allows players to fight with fatal consequences. World leaders condemn the bloodthirsty game, but the CEO of Terminal refuses to stop them. The only way to end the murderous game is to fight and beat Terminal's undefeated champion. That doesn't make sense, but whatever. For Special Forces operator Alex Ward, a new war is about to begin. As he battles enemies in both the real and the virtual world, a war where his very life is at stake with every passing moment. The fate of America and the free world lies in the hands of a few ordinary citizens, a soldier, a schoolteacher, and a banker. Can they rise to the challenge, or will they see their country destroyed without a fight? There you go. That's the author's novel description, and it feels that kind of like movie trailer kind of thing. Basically, this is an easy review. This is not actually a LitRPG, and I know the story itself isn't like super horrible. But it does actually say LitRPG in the title and in the description of the novel, but it's not even close. It's not even really, I mean, to me, maybe it's game lit, but there are no game mechanics. It's really just a virtual gladiator arena where players can really die if they lose. And all the combat is described as normal fantasy combat. So there's no game mechanics. So there's definitely no RPG mechanics in the story. So it's more of a simulation where like people log into a terminal and look, they're there physically in this arena fighting with like swords and axes and katanas and whatever else they decide to choose. And it's a gladiator arena. A lot of the story is also like military combat, which actually seems what this publisher specializes in. And this is, I think, again, a case of like a publisher who's like, oh, let's do one of those LitRPG stories. I hear they're popular. We can make some money there. And they tried to craft something without actually really understanding what LitRPG is. And this one is the case. And the last one I reviewed was the case where they're by publishers and who just don't understand what the genre is. And so these things pop up and they're just not. And so this one also gets a score for him because, again, it's not LitRPG as advertised. So there you go. Okay, on to our next one. Bounty Harlot, A World of Brutalia, a LitRPG by Alexei Turpimov. I think this is a Russian translation, mostly because of all the Russian references. If it is, the translation work was done pretty decently. It is 114 pages, $2.99, available on Kindle Unlimited. I'll read you the author's description. A world unlike any other, a LitRPG unlike any other. Welcome to Brutalia, the world that lets your inner brute roam free. Tasha skimmed the text quickly, rushing over the history of the MMORPGs. She had heard Misha use the term before, and he had a sense of it. How Brutalia was essentially a very cool RPG with a twist. It was adult only, and it had no rules of ethics attached to it. Anything went. Say what you like, and more importantly, do what you like. Especially with female NPCs and, yes, player characters. Do with them as you wish, because they're there because they like it, if you get our drift. That's literally what this novel description says. Wow, she thought, pretty tacky. And she, for one, wasn't there of her own violation. In the section on doing with the ladies as you please, she came to a paragraph of her own class. You'll especially enjoy the Harlot character, a class of character, and we really do mean enjoy. Her ability to please is non-priority. But even if you can't afford her, fear not. In Brutalia, you're allowed to take the Harlot class any way you can get her. Yeah, literally that's what it says. So there we go. Just a warning, there's lots of cursing. There is some graphic sex, although there's a lot less than I thought there were going to be. And there's a lot of rape attempts. Like, that's what a lot of this story is. This is a trapped in the game novel in a game world whose only distinguishing characteristic is that it allows for rape for all the female NPCs and female players. There are a few poorly written graphic sex scenes, but that's not the main focus of the story. Those sexes refer to a lot. The main character is a girl that gets kidnapped in real life, but she injures herself when she tries to escape, and so the bad guys put her into this game with the character class Harlot. She has to constantly fend off the attempts of other players who try to rape her throughout the entire story. She tries to level up with the help of an NPC she falls in love with and has sex with sometimes. Her goal basically is to get help from the outside world to find her and free her from the bad guys. The game mechanics aren't anything special. They're just your standard level up stuff, skills, health, mana bars, that kind of thing. Anything you see generally in a regular MMO. And again, the only different thing about this particular game is that it allows and encourages like this rape culture. Overall, this is kind of a mixed story. Like, it wasn't sure what it wanted to be like. From the description, you would think, oh, this is a sexy time story, right? There's a lot of sex references. And if that's what it was, it would feel more like that's what it's supposed to be. But there are relatively few sex scenes, and the ones that are there are like a paragraph long, and they're very few and far between. Now, or ultimately, you think, oh, this is a female-driven action story. Like, she's dropped in this bad world, but she kicks butt and takes names and does a bunch of adventuring action. I'm like, not as much as well. And because it doesn't really focus on any one of those aspects, and it's not really one or the other, it doesn't do either well. And that just made it underage. Like, pick a lane, stick to it, because of how unfocused it is. Like, oh, it's fine, I guess. And just in the respect, like those two potential storylines, I should say, it was kind of boring. But what pushed me into the dislike category for this particular novel is definitely the rape stuff. I'm like, because there is there's a fundamental message to this novel that says, if the main character gets raped, it's her fault because she didn't fight hard back enough against her attackers, and that she may have secretly wanted it. I'm like, that message is like, I'm just not on board with that message. People or adults, read what you want in life, obviously. I won't judge you for that, obviously, but this one for me is like, I'm like, no, like that's not, it doesn't, I'm like, that doesn't work for me particularly, but I'm like, I don't like it. I'll just say that. Didn't enjoy it as far as like that particular portion of it. And so for me, it could score 4 out of 10. That's Bounty Harlot, a World of Brutalia LitRPG, with a score of 4 out of 10. There you go. Okay. Next, Playing for Keeps, Alpha World, book number 4, written by Daniel Schienehofen. No, actually, I remember in episode number 98 of the podcast, which is the one right before this one, I did a Q&A with Daniel. Very nice guy. Always really loved talking to him. Really fun dude. But he reached a milestone on his Facebook page for his author page. And so he did a Q&A for his audience. Like he collected like 80 questions, and we had a good time just talking to them, talking to people in live chat, asking them other questions. So really fun. Go check it out. But the review for Alpha World Book 4, the novel is 421 pages. It is $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. So this one actually just came out today. So there you go. Here is the author's description. Alpha Company is embarking on a grand mission, crossing the Deadlands to find and conquer Gwain's Keep. Led by Albert, most of the guild embarks on what could be an epic and memorable journey as they aim at being the first two-souled guild to capture a keep. Besides safeguarding the members of the guild, Albert also has to worry about the natives that are with him on the journey. Deidre Curley, Stacy's sister, is one of the one he worries about the most, having sworn to see her safely across the lifeless desolation of the Deadlands. Having to be ultra-vigilant during the day, night brings welcome relief and relaxation to the raid. For Albert, Karen, and Stacia, it also brings their chance to help Fluffball come to grip with her past. Rejoin the group of Alpha World while they play for keeps. This book contains adult language. Like the rest of the series, if you don't like those themes, you won't like them here. Don't say I didn't warn you ahead of time. After all, one of the main supporting characters is Succubus. That's all in the novel description. And again, full disclosure, the author gave me an advance review copy just so I can have it in the review ready for time when he published. But I bought this thing as soon as it came out because I liked it. I enjoyed it. Again, 421 pages, $4.90. Nice spot on price. Also available on Kindle, but so go read it. It's quite nice. There are going to be some things though that not everybody likes, but this is book 4 in the series. Like if you're in this far in the novel, you kind of know what you're getting. Book 4 starts off immediately after the end of book 3 and is almost just like a continuation of that novel. Like they're literally going through the portal at the end of book 3 and they're coming out of the portal at the end of book 4, at the beginning of book 4, I should say. The main character, Albert/Seamus, and the core group join the rest of the guild in the Deadlands. Their goal, again, to conquer and travel to one of the abandoned keep in this high-level zone called the Deadlands, get a bunch of great loot, and level like crazy, of course. And while I'm personally a fan of the series, I absolutely recognize that there's something in the story that they don't mesh with everybody. This one in particular is a travel story. Like a good portion of it is just going to the keep and like the fights there they have as they get closer. Like the fights gradually get a little bit bigger, a little bit harder as they continue in their journey. But like a good 75% of the novel is it's been traveling to the abandoned keep through the Deadlands. And if you want something for comparison, remember those Lord of the Rings movies? And in the first one, all they really did was walk around a lot. And that was a lot of like, yes, there were some fights and there was some walking and character development, but it's mostly walking, mostly travel. And that's what this is. This is kind of the Fellowship of the Succubus. There's a lot of traveling, but there's also like a lot of good character development. And to me, that is definitely a highlight of this novel and in the series in general. That first 75% again, there are some fights, but they're not the major focus of that first 70%. Like they're just there to make sure everybody gets loot, everybody, there is some action that's interspaced between everything. So it's not just character development all the time. And the pacing is really quite well. It's done. It's normal, but that first 70% is a journey story, like the first Lord of the Rings movie or novel. And a lot of that character development is done in, if you've read the series, you're already kind of aware of this. The Succubus has the ability to go into people's memories and help them see the actual events as they occurred, and not just the way that people remember them necessarily. It's a very interesting social concept of like, there are your memories that are in your brain that aren't really accurate. Like the time makes those memories fade. Our own skewed perspectives on them change our view of how they occurred, and memories change over time. Like from the actual event, like over 10, 15 years, the way you remember something isn't necessarily the way it actually occurred. That's one of the reasons why when people are witnesses in cases, multiple people can have different stories for the exact same event that they all witnessed because their views are different. And so what the succubus can do is basically do magic, have that person see that event, not without the filters of like the mind protecting itself. And she'll show them what actually occurred and help them kind of deal with the trauma or that event. And that, to me, it's a beautiful storytelling tool because it allows for just like this great opportunity for telling characters' backstory, but also for creating like this amazing emotional resonance between the characters and the readers. And I generally really do love this storytelling thing that the author does with these memory recaps. I don't know what to call it, like these memory things. And I when I was reading these memories about these memories for these characters that I've come to like really like, I found myself getting emotional off them, like being super like, oh no, please don't tell me that's gonna happen to this character in her past, or like, oh that's horrible, I'm gonna beat up the person that the main character is facing in his memory. And there were like these genuinely emotional outbursts for myself reading these stories, and I think it's just a wonderful thing that the author does, and I love it. I really do like that aspect of it. But I know not everybody's like me. A lot of people like more straight action. A lot of people like more adventure. And while that is here, especially in like the last quarter of this novel, there's definitely some good fighting and some good like dungeon crawling kind of stuff, like raid stuff. Like that first 75% is going to be harder for some people if you don't like that memory diving stuff. And also there's another aspect of that first 75% where the author, or should I say the characters in the story, do talk about polyamory and having multiple people in the same relationship. And for some people, if you're not okay with like talking about those alternative relationships or even reading about them, that's also going to be a big draw away from you. For me personally, I love learning new things and learning about new ways of perspectives of seeing life and love and just the way people do things, because my life is my perspective. I'm Hispanic, I'm male, I'm like in my 30s. And so my world has been seen through that lens, you know, but that's not everybody else's. And one of the things I love about fiction and science fiction and fantasy, of course, is the opportunity to see the world through someone else's eyes. And I think this is a really great example of like seeing an opportunity, like, oh, this is a kind of social structure and relational structure that I never thought about. And it was interesting because the author does a really good job, like describing not just like, oh, it's a bunch of people having sex. It's about connecting and normal relationship, just in multiple phases. And I think it was handled really well. And I really do like it, especially because the main character actually has struggles. He struggles with his love for multiple women and how it clashes with his ingrained beliefs and teachings from his father about monogamy. And I'm like, that's a genuine conversation that the main struggle that the main character has. And I think it was really good just to see someone else's viewpoint. But again, I know it's not for everybody, which is why I'm mentioning it here in the review, because I don't want you to go into this thing and like, oh, I didn't know that this was going to be a thing, I'm throwing it away. I'm like, just don't start it, because it's a big part of this particular novel. And there is some resolution in that respect. So there you go. Again, at the 70% mark, then you get a lot more of your action. Like the rest of that novel, after 70% mark, is totally action stuff. Like they get to the castle, they do a raid, a bunch of good actiony stuff I'm looking for you. And it's a good raid scene. Like the action stuff in this series in general, it's not the thing that I love the most about it, but it's not bad or anything. Overall, I had a good time with the story, but again, I like the memory dive aspect of it. I like as a storytelling tool. I like the exploration of different ways of looking at the world and relationships. So for me, I enjoyed it. I really did. But again, I know not everybody does. So I'm letting you know that exists in this particular story. For me, gets a score of 7 out of 10. That's playing for keeps. Alpha Rule book number 4 with a score of 7 out of 10. There you go. Go read this story. It's enjoyable. Okay. On to number 7, Unbound, Deathlord, Obliteration by Edward Castle. This is the second book in that series. Okay, this one's pretty long. It's 735 pages, $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Now, I'm not sure if that page count is entirely accurate. This one felt a little shorter than that, or it just could be the fact that I, ran through it so quickly. But I'll read you the author's description. Jack is out for blood. After being manipulated by his family most of his life and believing an even worse lie for the past few years, he has finally learned the truth. Now that he knows that what Vsaught has taken from him, he is going to take everything from them, even if the country is destroyed in the process. The plan is to strike from all sides so that those who still live can watch their lives and their life's work be reduced to ashes. But in digging their grave, will Jack wind up buried alongside them? Ooh, that's good. I like that. Actually, that's a really good novel description because it totally describes the revenge aspect of the story and the fact that the main character is okay with bad consequences happening to other people as long as he gets his revenge. So good stuff. Full disclosure, I got an advanced copy of the novel for review again. I purchased it when it came out. Again, I generally just get advanced copies because I try to have a review ready when the novel comes out, so it's there. Now, let's see. It's been over a year since book 1 in the series came out, and sometimes that makes it hard to remember what happened in the story. But thankfully, the author has a really nice summary of the events in book 1. So yeah, it's actually a nice little refresher before diving into book 2. Book 2 starts with the real life consequences of what happens with the main character Jack, discovered at the end of book 1. He's quite plainly out for revenge. And not only does he seek revenge in real life, but he also seeks to get his revenge by destroying the game from within. At least that's the justification the author uses to continue his story. And I feel like that's kind of what it is. It's like, if you destroy the game in real life, like you destroy those servers, I feel like that would accomplish what you're looking for. But again, this isn't a LitRPG novel, so there has to be like the VR RPG aspect of the story. And so that's kind of the justification the author uses to go back into the game world to destroy it from within. I'm like, and I'm okay with that. This is a fun story, so I'm okay with that weird justification. Now, in reality, a lot of the in-game story in this novel is like a slice of life adventure. It's very action-oriented. There's the addition of a larger group fighting in this novel, some politics, as the main character levels, kills, and looks for a way to destroy the game world. It's good stuff, but just know what you're getting into. Remember that this main character is not a hero. He isn't. He's not a villain necessarily, but I would say he's like chaotic neutral. Like he's willing to do whatever he needs to, despite the consequences to get what he wants done. And there are some really negative effects to the real world for what he does. And I generally found the real life storyline like as interesting as the game stuff. I'm like, oh, that's good. That's a good story. When you don't mind getting out of the game to see what crazy things are happening in the real world, that's a good story to me at least. So, like I said, the real life story is just as good. Overall, had a good time. There were some slow moments, and again, the in-game story is very slice of life up until like the very end. The end is super cool. But if you're not into slice of life stories, this may not really do it for you. If you need like everything in the story to have a purpose and a plot, that's not what a lot of this is. Like it leads to a specific like ending point, but a lot of it's just like he goes on adventures, he does things, and maybe it kind of sort of leads to somewhere eventually. But you could actually skip a lot of the game stuff and you wouldn't ruin the plot. It was just like, it's still fun adventure stuff though. For me, had a good time with it. Score of 7 out of 10. Unbound, Deathlord, Obliteration, with a score of 7 out of 10. There you go. Okay, on to Crafter's Passion. Written by Chris Skinny. He's the author of the Thousand Tale series as well. This is a independent story in that same universe. Okay, it is 321 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Stan can't afford to have his brain removed. The richest and luckiest players in the video game Thousand Tales get their minds uploaded to its virtual paradise world, while Stan can barely buy a handheld console. Instead of sulking, he plays and grows and becomes a skilled craftsman and seafaring explorer. The game's ruling AI, Ludo, helps him find the hope of inspiration missing from his real life. When the AA starts asking for favors and having him reach out between Ruul and digital worlds, Stan has the chance to turn his life into an actual action adventure. But first, he needs to earn the most valuable prize of all, freedom. So there you go. Okay, and that's actually a really decent description of what the novel is. Unlike many of the other side stories in the Thousand Tales universe, or even like the main stories, this one doesn't focus on the digital heaven necessarily, or people's minds being uploaded to like this full immersion game where they can do whatever they want to, and it's a form of digital heaven. Instead, it's a coming-of-age story combined with a fascinating speculative narrative about skills learned in game transferring to the real world, and that's kind of where it got me. I'm like, oh, that's neat. That's cool. This one is definitely one of my favorite independent stories from this series. And again, instead of being another VR heaven story, there's a lot of like speculative fiction here, and I think that's good for me because it's interesting. It combines again a real world backstory of like a kid living in a resource sharing collective or commune, and him basically playing Thousand Tales on an old tablet he bought. He gets into the crafting in the game and gradually becomes more interested in real life crafting and because of like the limited amount of resources and actual money in the commune he lives in. The lessons he learns about woodworking and metalworking in the game, which is very like fantasy RPG stuff, transferred to real life, in that he becomes interested like, oh, can I do this thing I'm practicing in the game in real life? And the skills kind of transfer to some degree. And it's basically like a speculative commentary on like, oh, how virtual reality training now is actually benefiting people in real life. Like this is aside from the review, but like there are VR games and there are VR systems and computer simulations where people can kind of play games and do things like fix cars and like pull them apart and like do specific things. And the computer will actually guide them like, oh, you need to use this wrench, it pops up, and you need to do this thing to pull out these parts, and whatever it is. Or like there's a virtual store simulator where like you put in the Oculus Rift wherever and you have to handle things, and you're doing virtual shopping and like cashier stuff. And while those things aren't perfect, they do kind of foreshadow to me, at least, that is a perfectly valid training system combining like the freedom and freedom to self-learn in a repetitive environment in the comfort of your home or a place, and those things you're learning in that virtual system translating to real life to some degree. And I think that's a lot of what drew me to this particular story being interesting. Now back to the review part. There's also some other game stuff in the system, and that in the commune or community he lives in, there's like a weird kind of gamified system of like, oh, social credit points, like for being hygienic, or like saving water when you're taking baths or showers, or like grouping with the community and like watching propaganda videos, or going on a baking trip with your fellow community members, and those social points can turn into like in-community money or script. And so there's a whole like gamified subsystem within this community, which I thought was kind of neat as well. Let's see. And again, the VR education aspect was probably the most interesting to me though. But for this main character, because he's at this point in the story being exposed to new ways of thinking, new ways of education within the Thousand Tales universe from this tablet. Like most of the stories told from the when you like the kid looking at a tablet, but then like his actions are described as from a first person perspective point of view in the story. But because he's learning things through this Thousand Tales universe, learning things that aren't in the official propaganda for the state, like any good education, it changes the way he thinks. It kind of shows him the cracks in the system that he's a part of, and it makes him think like, is this what I want to continue doing? Is this what's going to make me happy? Are there other choices than what the state is giving him? And like a very interesting real life storyline as well that definitely ties in to the importance of what is occurring in the game system that he's participating in. There's still, again, adventuring, monster fighting, exploration in the game stuff as well. So it's not just like all crafting, training stuff. I don't want to make you think that it is. But a lot of it is also this coming of age story set in a semi-dystopian future. And there's lots of great fictional commentary points of view of like the negative and positive aspects of like community projects, incentivization, gamification, communism, and a bunch of other things like that. And you can tell the author has like specific opinions about like digital training and education tech, its possibilities, its pitfalls. And there's a lot of cool like sci-fi aspects to this as well, which is one of the things I'd kind of missed about the series, because like the last few novels were fine, but they never really got good scores because they were just missing that cool speculative aspect that I really liked from the first few novels and like the main series of the story. For me, this is an enjoyable read. I do have to point out though that this novel isn't going to be for everybody. Like if you're a person who loves crunchy or like number heavy LitRPG, this isn't it. This really isn't. Like the RPG aspects in the novel are there. They're continuous throughout the game portion of it, but they're minimal and they're not really like number heavy. Like there's a character sheet and there's like skills with numbers and everything. And they're constantly used and all that. But if you love, and I personally, I would really have loved, like this would probably have gotten like an 8. If there had been more detailed number systems, like detailed item descriptions with like damage ranges, and like just more information about, oh, this is his first thing he made, and this is the damage description, and this is the durability, and like this is the item description. Then as you get better, you could see that it gets better, like it's a crafting bonus or whatever, and there are actual numbers associated with it. I would have loved to see like more detailed number progress that way, but that's not how the author writes, and he's never written like that. Like most of these stories aren't really super number heavy, and that's just a choice of the author. I'm like, that's just what it is. So if that's what you're looking for, this isn't it. But like I said, other qualities of the story for me really make up for that. Like I said, the speculative nature of it. If you like sci-fi stories that make you think a little bit about how technology is and where it might take us, that's definitely what this is. And for me, that made it enjoyable. I'm definitely kind of a sucker for crafting as well, so that's kind of a thing for me as well. But more than that, again, I like the fact that it made me think about where VR and education might be heading in the future, and kind of the social backlash or like how it might play out. Like when I'm done with the novel and I'm still thinking about the points that it made afterwards, that's good to me, and that makes it like really enjoyable. So for me, it's a neat story. Gets a score of 7 out of 10. But again, it's for a specific audience, I think. So for me, that's Crafter's Passion with a score of 7 out of 10. I liked it. Okay, on to our next review. Chrysalis, The Crucible of Immortality, book number 2, written by Leto Spirit Blackman. There you go. It is 375 pages, $4.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Okay, the author's description. Jax and Kayla have discovered that they've actually been on the Crucible for almost 1,000 years. That's an alien planet. But they have no memories of that time, only dreams that haunt them. Now, with new allies, they must prepare for the cast army that is marching towards them. Jax, a man of science, must come to terms that there is so much he does not understand. Kayla, a construct built from an ancient, mysterious race, a naive, yet headstrong woman, must learn what it means to be human. Jill, a young woman with demons in her past, must find her place in this new and often cruel world. Doc, a sentient AI in a liquid metal body, is a mystery. He now has part of the Watcher in him. How will that change? Aurelia, a natural-born girl of the Crucible, her parents murdered, has not spoken since. She holds power no one seems to understand. How will she wield it? So there you go. That's the author's description. And I guess those are valid questions and points, but a lot of the story doesn't have anything to do with those things. Again, it is 375 pages, $4.09, a little bit more than I generally spend, but it's also on Kindle Unlimited. So there we go. I do have to basically address that the first 16% of this novel is a little bit awkward. Like there's a nice section at the very beginning that's like a catch up, like, oh, reminding what happens in the past, who like the bad guys are that they're going, and I don't mind like who some of the good guys are. But once you get past that, it's a little awkward. And that's mostly because there are so many characters in the story. Like there are 6 or 7 main and secondary characters. And at one point they all start talking to each other. in the same space and in the same room having this conversation, and it becomes very much of a mess. Like the dialogue in this section becomes like super stilted. No one seems to have a unique voice, and everyone's dialogue is written so similarly. It's like, oh, why does everybody sound the same? Even though like they're very different. But, like there's a whole mix of like men, women, children, AI constructs, a fairy, and like the main character's sister. I'm like, but everybody kind of has the same voice, including things like inconsistent uses of like contractions that changes them from like being in the same tense, I'm like casual to formal. And I'm like, it's just kind of like it's a scene that almost made put the book down, to be honest. But get past that or just skip it entirely. Like, you can skip the entire section between 10 and 15 and you don't lose anything. That's where that section is. So if you choose to, that's great. I don't, again, you don't lose anything. And when you start at that 16% mark, the novel really does improve because the scenes become less clutter. Like there's usually like at most 4 characters in a scene. And so it's a much easier dialogue. And after that 16% mark, it's just more actiony. So I think that also helps improve the writing and the story in general. Okay, so there are a few spoilers ahead of you if you don't want to hear them. Basically, the novel gets a score of like 6 out of 10 because the game stuff doesn't seem to matter as much. And I mean, in the fact that the story will sometimes completely ignore the game system for the sake of story, for the sake of events, for the sake of like things going in a certain direction. Like it'll completely ignore the rules that have been set up previously, even like the world rules, or like story rules, or like the RPG rules. And for me, that just made it less interesting. And the story gets a score 6 out of 10. It's not a bad story. It's not even a boring story. For me, it wasn't enjoyable because of that particular aspect of it. Now, from here on, there are going to be some spoilers and some specific examples of like where the novel lost me in some places. Okay, so you've been warned. Okay, I'll say that at that 16% mark, the story starts to become more actiony. Like there's a dungeon dive that's really generally fun. Like it's interesting. There's an interesting variety of creatures, and then this is where it starts to lose me. At the 32% mark during this dungeon run, the author just hits like this really huge reset button for the story. Like up until then, it's like, oh, everybody's preparing for the bad guys to come and try to attack the village, and they're doing whatever they can to set up defenses, and they're going to look for like weapons for everybody. And then at 30%, it's like, bam, it's like, none of that matters, fool. We're going to reset the whole thing. And like, it's legitimately a reset. Like everybody's split up. Nobody's in a group anymore. Like the main character goes on his teleported one place. Jill, his sister, is teleported somewhere else, and she goes off with, like to save the fairy and like the pet tiger and the little girl. And the Kayla, the main character's like love interest at that point, and his companion is teleported somewhere else, and she has this a whole other adventure. And everybody, it turns into like this multi-narrative story where like everybody does their own thing, which is kind of what the beginning of book 1 was. So it's not like a huge surprise or a huge shift. But again, that at that 30%, there's an event that's like, bam, everything that was going to happen is switched. And I feel like it's just a twist for twist's sake. And it doesn't really make sense to the story, especially because like, this is again, slightly spoilery, a major villain from book 1 that you thought was just like, oh, done, that he's dead for thousands of years, shows up out of nowhere. And I'm like, it doesn't make sense. Why? Like it's a legitimately good villain that was built up in a book. Was like, you thought that was all done because this story is literally set thousands of years in the future from the beginning of book 1 on an alien planet. So this character from Earth should not show up at all. Like it doesn't make sense. But still, it's a twist, and I just feel like it's there for the sake of just being a twist and not to make it doesn't make sense. Not always for me. And again, that's kind of the story of like where I'm sort of seeing like, oh, this is about story over game stuff. And like the story will completely ignore logic and rule sets and game rules that have been set up, and even like world rules, like larger like rules for the sake of an interesting story. And that's just a story. That's an author's choice. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that's the author's choice, and I respect that as an author and as a reader. It just made my brain crazy And so I couldn't enjoy it as much as I wanted to. For example, there's a lot of wand waving in this story where it's like, oh, we're going to ignore the game rules in the world just to have something happen. And I gave the example like an old villain coming back. Another example is that one of the characters dies. And again, it's already been set up that they'll be reborn at some point, randomly placed in the world. But when she dies, when these characters die, they're not supposed to remember anything about what's happened. And that's a major point in like the entire series. And then these characters, when they die, yes, they're reborn, but they're reborn back at level 1. They have no skills that they'd previously established. Like they could have lived for hundreds of years, beginning like level 700. But if they died, they're randomly teleported somewhere in the world, and they're set back at level 1 with no memories of all that time. And so when this main character dies, that doesn't happen for her. Like there's a magic wand and we're saying, oh no, we're going to allow you to remember your entire last 2 weeks on this planet, which is the entire part of book 1 and 2. So I'm like, that's a little wand in it. Again, it completely ignores like a very clearly stated like world rule. Additionally, there's something happens toward the end of the novel, which like essentially takes the main character from being level 10 to being level 300 in an instant. And I'm like, that doesn't match the game rules. And there's things like that kind of bug me. And again, there were unexpected revelations of the characters' powers. They suddenly spontaneously develop powers and abilities not related to the rules set up. For example, one of the main characters just suddenly becomes a kung fu master for no reason. And it's like, oh, by the way, she studied martial arts on Earth like 2,000 years ago. And so she can suddenly become a master now. I'm like, okay. And the same thing with a lot of the other characters. Overall, again, the story's not boring, which is nice. It's not getting like a 5 or anything. The fighting this time was better written than it was in book 1. Again, there are a noticeable number of grammar and other technical writing issues with the story, like literally like words missing out of sentences and some grammar stuff. And I'm like, that's just a part of it. I made the same comments about book 1 when it first came out. So it's just a thing you have to get used to if you're going to read this series. But I lost a lot of interest when every time there's like this rule bending or rule breaking, or it felt like the RPG stuff didn't really matter because like if a story needed to go a certain way, it would ignore it or create whatever new rules it wanted. I'm like at that point, I'm like, oh yes, this is LitRPG. There are clearly stated level progressions and experience and item descriptions and all that good stuff. But it's like fundamentally, like it feels like if the story needs it to be, it'll ignore all these rules entirely. And to me, at least for me, I should say, a good lit RPG story, those game rules matter as much as like physics, as like gravity. Like you generally don't ignore gravity in a story, right? Your characters don't suddenly start floating unless it's like a sci-fi story or whatever, and you're on a planet. But generally, like, those physical rules of like light acting a certain way, gravity, those rules aren't ignored, right? Because they're fundamental forces in the universe that we all kind of understand are not bendable, right? And I feel like in a good LitRPG story, the RPG game rules should feel similar because it creates a basis of understanding how the world works, how progression works. And when those things are just ignored for the sake of story, I'm like, that to me lessens my enjoyment. So for me, the story doesn't get a good review. It gets a score of 6 out of 10. Like, it's not a bad review, but again, like, I didn't enjoy it, and I don't think I'll pick up book 3 because of it. So there you go. That's Chrysalis, the Crucible of Immortality, book number 2, with a score of 6 out of 10. There you go. Okay, next one. There we go. J.A. Cipriano's Soulstone, Oblivion, a LitRPG novel. And that's going to be Ruul, book number 3. Okay, this one is 527 pages, $5.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here is the author's description. Save the Gruul. Beat the dungeon. Get epic loot. After a few minor setbacks, Aaron and Crash find themselves all alone in the world of Ruul with only one chance at survival, finding the legendary Soulstones before the Maelstrom forces eat them and their friends. Worse, the only way to get strong enough to save their friends is to enter a dungeon no one's ever beaten before, defeat the 4 elemental bosses who reside inside, and shatter the massive statue trapping them inside. Sure, it might be impossible, but if it were easy, everyone would have done it. Right? There you go. Okay, this is like a really simple review because this is a dungeon dive story. If you've been reading this story, at the end of book number 2, the main character and his group left the beginner trial zone area, and so now they're in the larger world. There's player versus player, and there are characters who are level 70 or 80, and the medium range is 30, but the main characters are level 15 because that was the level cap in the starter zone. And so they need to do a bunch of leveling up if they're going to have a chance of surviving against other characters. And so that's what this story is. This story is basically a gigantic justification, let's get these guys some levels where they don't, or otherwise they're just going to be murdered by anybody who happens to chance across them. And so that's what a lot of the story's purpose is. But as far as what it actually is, it's a dungeon dive. That's what it is, and that's okay. It's a good, satisfying dungeon dive. There are some interpersonal relationships between them. There are 2 returning characters, Aaron and Crash. Everybody else is gone. There's the rabbit with an attitude, George W. Rabbit, who's very funny. And then there were 2 new people that are added to this group in this story. And there's some interpersonal relations between those 2 people because they're sisters, and well, that's enough of an explanation. Sisters have interpersonal issues. That's part of their character arc. But again, the love story is just a good dungeon dive. There's a good variety of monsters. There are puzzles. There's good XP and loot. And there we go. That's all you really need. And so that's what this is. This particular novel does not advance the main plot very much. Or even any of the side events that occurred at the end of book 2, which are just kind of referenced to book 1, saying, oh, these things happened. So there's not a lot of huge plot development. This is really just a dungeon dive, and that's okay. It's fun. It's entertaining. But you could technically skip it, from book 1, 2, and then go to 4. But if you just want a fun, enjoyable kind of sit back and enjoy adventure story that's a dungeon dive, this is it. And I liked it. I did. It gets a score of 7 out of 10 for me. I had a good time. Soulstone, Oblivion, World of Ruul, book number 3 with a score of 7 out of 10. Okay, last review, folks. There we go. Kingdom Level 4 by Adam Drake. This particular series, for a lot of people, has been very hit and miss, even for me. It is 332 pages, $3.99. It is available on Kindle Unlimited. Here's the author's description. Kingdom Building 101. Rob's grass on his fledgling kingdom is tenuous at best. Expansion is impossible thanks to an angry war clan of goblins encroaching on the eastern border. Also, monsters and bandits run rampant within the valley, threatening his subjects. And since trade is non-existent and supply lines are dead, the ramshackle village must be kickstarted into an economically viable town, one that generates income for the meager royal treasury instead of sapping it. Solving these problems is his responsibility, or the kingdom will never reach level 5. But there's a larger concern which casts a dark cloud over everything. He is not the only kingdom, and neighboring rulers have started to view his janitor-turned-king as either an exploitable ally or easy prey. So there we go. This is, again, not that complicated review. Thankfully, in this particular story, there's finally some kingdom building. I've been hoping to see some since book number 1. It's titled Kingdom. I don't know why I thought there was going to be kingdom building, but I did, and I've been expecting it. And finally, there's a little bit here. It's towards the end of the novel, so don't expect to see it like the beginning. But the main character, Rob, does a bunch of quests essentially to get him to a level 6 where he can actually finally get a special item that'll upgrade his village to a town, and he unlocks a bunch of kingdom building aspects to it. However, most of the story is that slice of life quest building. The purpose of this entire story is to get the main character to level 6 so he can unlock the town from village to town. And that's kind of its purpose. It's kind of a leveling story again, or a slice of life story where he just goes on adventures, he does some things, and they're entertaining stories, but again, they don't in of themselves really advance the plot. So if you're okay with that kind of story, this is fun. It really was. Like each one of those adventures, each one of the things that he did in the story, they're entertaining. There's lots of action. There's a little bit of crafting. There are interesting characters to meet. There's some character development for other characters. But that's basically what it is. So don't expect more. Like if you wanted to, you could skip everything from 20 to 79%. Like if you didn't want to read the slice of life stuff, and you will get the plot points. Like you really will. But for me, those things were fun. They were entertaining things. Yeah, they weren't like super plot intensive, but they were still good adventure stuff. Overall, I thought it was a good read. But I also like slice of life stories. So if you're not into that stuff, that's what a lot of this is. I should warn you though, at the end of the story, like the last 7% of this, it got super dark. I mean, like murder people that you kind of liked, kind of dark stuff. And so whether that's good or bad for you, I'm like, it did occur. So I don't know if this is going to take a darker turn or not, but it is there. So for me, I enjoyed it. Gets a score of 7 out of 10. That's Kingdom Level 4 LitRPG with the score of 7 out of 10. There you go. Ladies and gentlemen, 11 reviews for you in this particular episode of the podcast. Got them all done. That's it for everybody. Thank you very much for listening and watching. Remember, you can follow us on Twitter, on Facebook, on YouTube, on Patreon. If you want to support us in any way, shape, or form to help the podcast stay free and ad-free and all those good things, we do depend on your support. Otherwise, this podcast basically doesn't get made. So if you want to find out all the ways you can support the podcast, you can find out at litrpgpodcast.com/support. Thank you very much for hanging out with me, folks, for listening to the podcast for 99 episodes, as I geek out about and as I talk about this thing that I love, LitRPG. And until we can hang out again, ladies and gentlemen, remember to go read some LitRPG. Goodbye, everybody.